If you have said to yourself, I should write that, or if someone has said to you, you should write that, then I'm talking to you because you need to write. And that's why you're tuned in to yWrite. Hi, welcome to the yWrite podcast. My name is Angela Grout. I am your host, and I am the guest today. Today is an episode called Flying Solo, and I will be solo on the show because I am going to share with you something that I wish was out there for me when I started writing. And this is about how you collect pieces of a story, because you can collect pieces of a story through dreams and reality and inspiration. So I want to share with you a little bit of my own process, because maybe it will help you, because if someone shared their process of this, it definitely would have helped me. So as you know, I am the author of 4 books that are all available on Amazon. Here's 3 of them here. I have a few others that are in editing and proofreading right now, which is very exciting. But I also am a playwright, and I have written a screenplay for my 3rd book, April Rain. One of the plays that I've written is called In the Middle of the Night. And in the middle of the night is a lot of times where inspiration and dreams happen, inspiring writers. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about an inspirational dream that I had. And then I'm going to also kind of intertwine what I call the life of a florist. If you don't know that my life as a florist preceded this show, I was a florist owning the Agawam Flower Shop for over 30 years, closed it during the pandemic, and did not reopen it. I have pivoted now and became this podcast host, and I host writers' conferences and write stories to be shared with the world. And I talk to people about why they write their stories. So now I'm going to share with you, why I started writing a story called In the Middle of the Night and why I decided to make it into a play instead of a book. So In the Middle of the Night is a story about a muse who literally argues with a writer because she wants the writer to write a certain story and the writer doesn't want to write that story. And the reason why I had to make it into a play is because in the middle of the night I would wake up and start writing pretty much poetry, but the poetry had like a melody with it, and I could sing the melody. And all of a sudden I was like, this is a story that has songs. It's kind of told through songs. So I will share that process. But first, like I said, let's start off with the inspirational dream. So I'm going to tell you about my character, Christina Kay. Now, Christina Kay came to me in a dream. And this is the dream. I happened to be sleeping one night, and I had a dream of my grandmother, my Meme. Now, Meme had been gone for quite a few years, and it was wonderful to see Meme in the street. And my Meme had these huge angelic wings, and underneath her wings were all these little children. And I was so excited to see her, and I was like, Meme, Meme. I wanted to go and just hug her and touch her and kiss her. I missed her so much. And all of a sudden, in my ear, I'm being woken up, but I'm really not being woken up from the dream, but I'm being torn away because I'm hearing someone at my flower shop in my dream saying, Angela, come help us. A child died and we need your help. And I was really sad, and that I had to turn away from my grandmother, and I said, I want to go give you a hug, but I have to find out what's going on. And then all of a sudden the dream kind of changed a little bit. And in the dream, I now sat in a science class. And in the science class, I was being asked the question, what happens to the child if a mother is pregnant and the mother dies in the 1st trimester? Or if the mother dies in the 2nd trimester? Or if she dies in the 3rd trimester? And it was a very intense class. And I sat there, and there was a big whiteboard, and the teacher is pointing, if the mother dies in the 1st semester, the infant in her womb obviously dies. In the 2nd trimester, if the mother dies, most likely the child dies. If the mother is in the 3rd trimester, the child could be viable. Then they started going into what happens to this child if it dies. Do you bury it in the mother? Do you bury it outside the mother? Do you donate it to science? Whew. I woke up from this dream exhausted and had to pen it all out. So the first thing I write is, I saw Meme with these beautiful angel wings and all these little children underneath her, and it was so peaceful, and it just made me smile because when my grandmother was alive, she had been a foster mother for over 45 children. So for her to be in heaven watching over all the children, that's definitely what she would be doing. So I know I saw my grandmother. Then I'm writing down and I'm sketching out in major detail this science class. And oh my gosh, it was more exhausting for the dream, but I still needed to sketch it all out. And I'm drawing it all out on the paper. And, I don't know what any of this means, but I'm just kind of tucking it away. Well, then the life of the florist kicks in, because later that day I have to go into work. And I go into work, and a woman shows up in my shop who needs to get flowers for her daughter who died. So we sit down at the consultation table, and, at this point, the woman looks like she could be anywhere from 35 to 55, beautiful long hair. I'm not going to ask someone their age. And so I don't know how old her daughter is. We sit down at the table, and I, of course, pay my condolences. And I said, I'm so sorry about your daughter. When are the services? And she informs me that the services will be the following week here in Agawam. However, that day they were having services for her down in Florida, where she was a member of, I believe, the Coast Guard. I turned to her and I said, well, why aren't you down at the services? And she said, oh, the Coast Guard, they've taken care of everything. They do their own service with, her people. They've been so incredibly generous to us. They packed up all of her belongings and they're shipping them home. They're paying for all of her services. They're allowing her to be buried in the family graveyard instead of the military cemetery, which is just, we think that's wonderful. And she goes on, telling me the story. And I finally turned to her. I said, may I just ask how old your daughter is? She's 24 years old. And of course, like a little knife hits my stomach. I'm like, oh my God, this poor woman, 24 years old, her daughter's died in the military. So, I said, I'm so sorry. And, we sat there for a minute, just kind of in silence. And she said, I'm also going to be burying my other daughter. I said, what? She said, I don't know if you remember, but my other daughter died 10 years earlier and you were the florist. And unfortunately, I did not remember that particular service. So she informed me that her other daughter was 24 months old and had died of a heart condition. And she was born with a heart condition. They knew she probably, wouldn't survive very long. She died at 24 months old. And the older daughter, Christina Kay, she was 14 years old when her little sister died. And she said, so we're taking her sister's ashes and we're going to put them in Christina's casket and we're going to bury them together. I said, okay, that's lovely. She said, I want you to make this funeral cross because when the younger daughter died, Christina had ordered a cross that I made and it said sisters on it. She said, could you make that again? I want that there. I said, absolutely. I said, what did it look like? What colors? And she turned to her husband and said, could you go get it? And literally the dad walked to the car, came back out with this petrified floral cross that I had made 10 years earlier. And I thought, wow, I did pretty good work. It lasted this long. But it literally was hanging in Christina's room for 10 years. So now I'm going to remake this cross and it's going to say sisters and she's going to bury both of her daughters. And, it's just this moment where I said to her, I want to share a story with you and I don't know if this will help you. But last night I had a beautiful dream of my grandmother. And my grandmother had these beautiful big angel wings. And under the angel wings were all these little babies and all these children. And I explained how when my grandmother was alive, she had been a foster mother for 45 children, blah, blah, blah. I said, I just want you to know that my grandmother is going to take care of your kids in heaven. She's got them under her wings. And she just looked at me and took my hand and said, thank you so much for sharing that with me. It really meant a lot. So, as the life of the florist, sometimes when I have a dream, sometimes I share it. And it's happened on many occasions. But I want to continue with this story because this is how I decided to start writing in the middle of the night, which does feature Christina Kay. And it also features Jessica Briggs. And Jessica Briggs is the girl who was murdered in April Rain. So it shares the story of both of those muses trying to get the writer, me, to write their story when I am not the person who wants to write a story about murder or rape or suicide. It's just not something that I want in my wheelhouse. It's not something I want coming out of me. But as the years progressed and I continued to write, I realized, like most writers realize, that we become a vessel for the stories and they need to come through us. So we're going to go back to that day at the flower shop. and the mother gives me a hug, thanks me for sharing the story of my grandmother's giant wings that are now wrapped around her children in heaven. And I'm cashing her out at the register. And her phone dings. And she looks at it. Angela, can you read this? You're a writer, right? I said, yes. The funeral director needs me to proofread her obituary, and I just don't know if I can do it. Absolutely. So I take the phone, and of course, the first thing I see is Christina's picture. Now I'm eye to eye, face to face with this girl, and I'm like, whoa, you're beautiful, you're young, you're 24 years old. Holy cow, how did you die? Why, in my head, why did you die? Like, this isn't fair. And I'm reading this, and as I'm reading it out loud to her, my eyes get a few sentences ahead, and I kind of pause for a minute. And it talks about how, she joined the Coast Guard. She wanted to be part of a family. She loved to be diving in the ocean, and she wanted to go on these sea recovery missions. And maybe I'm making that up because that might be part of my character story now. Kind of get them a little confused. But it says, Christina had just been a surrogate for another family. And I froze. And I looked at her mother. I said, she just had a baby? She's 24 years old. She's in the military. And I said, yes. It was so confusing to us. She called us and told us that she met, someone in the military and they couldn't conceive. So she decided she would carry their child for them. And we didn't understand why she would do this because, if you're pregnant, you're not doing these diving missions. And, she was already pregnant when she told us. She gave birth. The family adopted the baby, and that's why she died. And I just put my hands across the counter. I said, did she die during childbirth? And she said, no. A few weeks later, they said she died from a single gunshot wound to the head. Well, again, I don't like writing about suicide, and I've heard a lot of suicides. And in my career as a florist and even as a person on earth, I have unfortunately known many people who have committed suicide and met so many families that have lost someone to suicide. And the one thing I will say, and I could talk more about this, is that when someone does commit suicide, they are not in their right mind at that moment. And if they waited a minute or an hour or a day, they wouldn't have done it. So we need to forgive them for not being in their right mind in that moment. So now I learned that Christina committed suicide. Well, this is not sitting well with me. It's just not. I'm really upset about it. So a few hours later, I have a woman come into the shop who says, I need to order flowers for my goddaughter who passed away. Change gears, because of course I was just working on a wedding order, which was very happy to do. But now all of a sudden I'm changing gears, and I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And, don't want to make the assumption it's for the same person, but of course it is. And she proceeds to tell me it's for her goddaughter, Christina Kay. And she says to me, I want you to make her a set of angel wings. And I just kind of said, her mom was here earlier. And I was telling her mother, that my grandmother came to me in a dream and she had these angel wings and blah, blah, blah. And she looked at me and she goes, that's wonderful. Did you tell her who your grandmother is? And I said, well, no. And she goes, you knew who she was, right? And I said, Christina's mother? I said, well, I know who she is now. And she did tell me I did her other daughter's funeral, but I didn't recognize her or anything. And this woman turned to me and she goes, you know who I am, right? And of course I, kind of didn't remember her. And she said, my mother and your grandmother were at the same nursing facility in their elder years. And all of a sudden I remembered. I said, oh, yes. And she goes, well, Christina's mother was your grandmother's nurse. And I just sat there and said, wow. I said, yeah, so my grandmother definitely has her kids under her wings. I go, I did not know that, and I did not tell her my grandmother's name. She says, you have to call her and tell her. I'm like, you know what? If you see her, you can tell her the story. I'm not going to call her and get out of my way. And, hey, you know the story I told you, by the way, this is my grandmother's name. Like, no, I'm not going to, she's mourning. You can tell her that story. So, I kid you not, because this is the life of the florist and how my life unfolds. Literally 5 minutes before I close that night, in walks Christina's mom. Angela, can I just ask you one more thing? I just was wondering if you could do this. Sure, we take care of the business. And I hear a little voice in my head saying, tell her, tell her, tell her. I said, Christina's godmother was in here earlier. I knew her, and I said, I told her the story, about my grandmother and the dream. And she was, oh my gosh, I've told so many people that today. It's really brought me so much comfort. I said, well, Christina's godmother told me that you knew my grandmother. And she was, And I said, well, does the name Mary mean anything to you? And I said her last name, and she said, well, she didn't say anything. She kind of looked at me like I was a ghost. And then she said, she was my favorite patient. She says, do you know that after my daughter died, Christina didn't want to go to school after the funeral. So the next day I brought Christina over to the facility, and your grandmother played cards with her all day in her room. Christina and your grandmother spent the whole day, and your grandmother's such a comfort and help to me, when she would sit there and talk to me because she knew how much I was grieving. And again, I just said to her, I said, well, there is no doubt that my grandmother has your girls under her wings in heaven. She said, yeah, I know. So, I guess that's a little sort of a proofing story, if you want to prove a story. Like, here's a little inspirational dream I had with a little bit of reality that happens in real life. However, in the days and months that followed, I would get up in the middle of the night. In the middle of the night, it feels so right, so I write it all again. And I'm not a singer, but that is one of the songs that I wrote for the title sequence. And I would start writing stories, and I would write memoir pieces in the voice of Christina, and in the voice of her grandfather, and in the voice of her grandmother, and in the voice of her mother. And, again, this is just creative writing stories. And in it started to evolve a story that I didn't want to write. And I would get up and I would write it. And one time I even ripped up the pages, shredded them, said, I'm not writing this story. And I did that a few times with April Rain, because I don't want to write rape scenes. I don't want to write suicidal scenes. I don't want to be writing a murder scene. But what I do want to write is the reason why someone may have been murdered, or the reason why someone may have committed suicide, or the reason why someone covered up a crime. And what I decided to do, and maybe I took a twist on the story, and maybe Dateline wants to check this story out. Who knows? But Christina, think about it. She wanted to be a deep sea diver in the military. And at 24 years old, only pretty much 2 years into the military, she decides out of the blue she's going to be a surrogate. Yeah, I wrote her a note and had her write me back and say, why? Why did you want to be a surrogate? And you know what? Turned out she didn't want to be a surrogate, but she did flirt with this commanding officer who was pretty cute. And he did do some very inappropriate things to her. And she did want to report what he did to her. But guess what? When she tried to report it, they shut her down. Commanding officer. We're going to switch now to the writer's fictional point of view. Commanding officer says, you think I'm going to accuse my best officer with all these stars and stripes of rape? No, that's not going to happen. You're going to terminate the pregnancy. And you know what? She ended up giving the baby up for adoption because she wasn't about to have an abortion, which kind of would make me think, isn't that interesting that the true life story is the military paid for all of her funeral services, also paid off her loans, shipped her body home, allowed her to be buried outside the military cemetery, and allowed the ashes of her younger sister to be buried with her. That sounds like a lot that the military would be paying for a woman who committed suicide. I'm just saying, this is where the writer's mind comes into play and tries to figure out a little bit more. And writing in the middle of the night was definitely challenging because, of course, I'm trying to write songs, and I'm going to share a little bit of I'm not going to sing to you. I already did that once, so if you want to hear it again, you have to replay it. But what I was able to do after getting all these songs down is hire a composer who I actually would sing the songs to, or at least do the melody to. And look at this. She wrote all of the music that goes with this. So there's 18 songs here that I look at and I don't understand this language. And again, I'll have to watch the episode with Ron Castonguay. If you haven't seen it, it's back a few episodes. He wrote a book on how to read music, and I definitely need to finish reading his book so I can read this music. But literally, I'm like doing the different songs, and she was able to write this out. So now I am sitting down with actors who are going to read the play, and this here is the script. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about this too, but here is the script. And for people who are looking to write scripts, I'm going to give you a couple little hints here, or little tips. Anything in capital letters is what is sung. So therefore, all capital letters are sung. Everything else is pretty much dialogue or scenery or like narration to it. So that's just like a little hint when you're writing a script. Getting all of this down is pretty amazing. When my readers come in, my actors come in to read the script, I also give them, and it doesn't always have to be a blue sheet, but this gives the list of all of the characters and a little brief description of them. So for instance, I have Chrissy, her name is Chrissy Highland, Chrissy Kay, K-A-Y, Chrissy Kay Highland. And here it just says, females, early 20s. She joined the military to be part of a family. She loves diving, looks forward to being a deep sea diver, but then becomes pregnant and dies. So now the actress actually knows a little bit more about the part she's playing. And, once she reads through the play, she's going to, obviously know everything that's going to happen. So when writing the play, it doesn't look like a play when you're writing it. You're literally interviewing characters, and you're writing things down, and you're doing research, and you're exploring dreams that you've had and inspirational thoughts that you've had, and even some of the reality that you've encountered, which some of it is your own inner knowledge. I mean, think about it. Like my inner knowledge is saying, wow, a little red flag, like the military's paying for all this stuff and she committed suicide. I mean, maybe they do that. I don't know. I mean, it's something I did start to look up, but a lot of times, especially in the old days, if you committed suicide in the military, you might not be allowed to be buried in a military cemetery. So anyways, this is just part of why I write. And it's because I, get these inspirational dreams. I have these inspirational thoughts. I have a very creative imagination, which can take me down a lot of different roads of what if. And with the story of Jessica Briggs, which is also in this play, because in the middle of the night, as this writer who is sleeping wakes up to someone singing to her saying, you gotta write it, if you don't write it, it will be gone. And again, I'm not a singer, but I did record myself on a side note, I recorded myself on my phone singing it so I could send it to the musical composer. And one day I happened to be in CVS, which shout out to CVS, my favorite store. Anyways, I'm with my daughter, and in my pocketbook, it just started playing. And my daughter looked at me mortified, like, really? You're playing a song you're singing? I'm turning it off quick because, at that point, it wasn't copywritten. I did not file it with the Writers Guild of America East or with the Dramatists Guild, things like that, which are all things, if you're writing a play, are things that you need to do. And, you can go watch Danny Eaton, I believe on episode 17, I believe he is, where we talk about a lot of these things because he's a playwright from West Springfield. And I actually have taken a few playwriting classes with him in order to get dialogue, in order to learn how to interview my muses. And, I've shadowed him a few times at the theater, and there was one time at the theater shadowing him, I sat up in his loft and looked at his stage and just was able to draw out the scenery, which I didn't bring, but draw out the actual, what the stage would look like. And, I hope when this play is produced that you guys will come see it so that you can see what it will look like, because obviously there's going to be a bedroom where there's a writer sleeping, and there's an office where she starts writing, and then there's some really beautiful music where she's literally arguing with her muse saying, get out of my house, get out of my head, get these thoughts away from me. I don't want to know this stuff. I don't want to see this stuff. But yet the muse shows. In my mind as a writer, I see it. On the stage, I'm going to show it, and the audience can then decide, what really happened to Christina with a K. And, do you understand why writers get up to write? Because when these muses have a story to tell, boy, they're going to find a way. And Jessica Briggs certainly found her way into April Rain, and Christina Kay has found her way into in the middle of the night. And that's a little bit about why I write. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of me flying solo, telling you what's going on. And I want to thank you so much for tuning into this episode to listen to me chat, because the thoughts of the writer, don't always have a filter coming out of the mouth, but on the page we can edit it and have a filter. So anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this unfiltered version of Why Write with Angela Grout. Please check out all my other episodes, subscribe to the YouTube page, and if you're looking to be a guest on this show, or you're looking to have me come and speak about my writing experiences, definitely contact me through www.y-write.com, and my books are on Amazon. Have a great day. Thank you so much for tuning in. And before I go, I have to give you a writing prompt. I mean, of course you have to have a writing prompt. That's what this show's about, teaching you how to write your story. So hopefully with me sharing where inspiration comes from, you're going to feel confident to share your own. So when the show's over, set that timer for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I don't know, set it for an hour. Sit down and use the writing prompt to write down something that's inspired you. Did you have a dream recently? Write it down. Did you see something where you said, what if? Write it down. I really want you to think about that dream, because you're going to see sometimes the dreams we have manifest into reality. So happy writing. Thanks again for tuning into Why Write. I'm your host, Angela Grout. Have a great day. See ya.